Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the second in our series of webinars hosted by AfriSam. 2 weeks ago, we started off by looking at the South African economy as we returned out of alert level 5 into alert level 4. And we concluded, after having a look at the overall economy, that we would zoom in and specifically look at the construction industry. I'm pleased to introduce to you today an expert in the industry from Industry Insight, David Metelerkamp. He's a senior economist at Industry Insight. He holds a master's degree in economics from Stellenbosch University. He joined Industry Insight in February 2015, and he is responsible for several industry reports, including the Construction Industry Forecast Report, the Monthly Construction Monitor for construction executives, the Investment Map, which is a provincially focused review, and he's also involved in the development of customized tools to improve data visualization and strategic analysis in the construction industry, including the development of customized dashboards and improved geological analysis through mapping services. So David will be taking us through his presentation today, focusing mainly on the construction industry. As we said previously when we launched this webinar series, that AfriSam is merely a host, so we do not influence the content in any way. Please feel free to ask whatever questions you would like to ask. We will get David to respond to those questions at the end. This is merely AfriSam's way of making a contribution to our customers, to business at large, and to the South Africans who are very concerned about the state of the economy and where things are heading. So we're very pleased to have our second expert on this platform this morning. I'm now going to start up the presentation, and David will take us through his presentation.
Fantastic. Good morning, everyone. Ooh, that is a bit in the middle. I'm gonna have to circle back here. Good morning, everyone. Fantastic to be with you today. Hope everyone is keeping safe at home. Hope you're comfortable. Strap yourself in. It's going to be a bumpy ride for the next hour or so. So thanks very much for having me. Isn't it fantastic that we can all do this in different parts of the country? We can all be here together today, and we can chat a little bit about the construction industry specifically. Apologies, we were just doing a test and we were cycling through the slides, but it looks like I'm just going to have to go back to the beginning. So a few spoilers there. Alrighty, great. Hi everyone again, fantastic to be with you. As Richard mentioned, my name is David Metelerkamp. I am the senior economist at Industry Insight, and we focus, for those who don't know us, we focus specifically on the construction industry. Construction industry is our bread and butter, and so that's what I would like to chat to you today about. So just a bit of an agenda, a bit of a plan. I'm going to chat briefly on the economy. Obviously important to touch on the economy. The economy is still a big driver, one of the overall drivers of the construction industry. Look at some of the more pertinent issues, but I want to be very brief on that because today I want to focus mainly on the construction industry. I want to chat about some of the few key things, right? Such as contextualizing the construction industry in this new alert system, the different levels that we have, which part of the construction industry is allowed to go back at the various levels. It is a bit different. It does change the dynamics to some degree. We're going to look at some initial data from Industry Insights, as well as some feedback from contractors who we've been talking to on the ground. Some of them who have started to go back to work under level 4. As you know, public sector construction projects are allowed to go forward. So we've been chatting to some of the contractors to get a feel of what's happening on the ground, what are some of the issues, what capacity they're at, etc. Then we're going to chat about a few of our forecast scenarios for the construction industry specifically. A report we released about 2 or 3 weeks ago. We have a few scenarios with regards to the spread of the COVID-19 virus, how it's going to affect the construction industry going forward. And then I would like to zoom in on the civil industry specifically, and then look at the two separately, because there are very different dynamics in this environment, right? Civil industry, very much reliant on overall government spending, whereas the building industry is very much driven by the private sector. In this crisis, the government is actually able to play a counter-cyclical role in the construction industry and in the economy as a whole, whereas the private sector isn't to a large degree. So this is going to have very different effects going forward for the overall outlook of the industry. Okay, so briefly, I'm more talking to myself now. Briefly, I'm going to chat about a little bit about the economy, just touch on a few of the key things. So obviously, COVID-19, it's turned our lives upside down. It does look like it is going to be the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression, over 100 years ago, or 90. Apologies, folks. I'm assuming I'm back in. Just the Webinar Jam app, it just kicked me out and I had to reload it. So I'm assuming I'm back in. Sorry about that. Okay, so let's keep going. As I mentioned, hopefully that won't happen again. As I mentioned, this is expected to be the worst economic crisis since the Great Depression. In this interconnected world we live in, something like this, the rate at which it has spread has just made the economic collapse unprecedented. So, I mean, if we look at some of this is just to show the very sudden nature of the crisis, is that this is unemployment claims in the United States. You can see going back all the way to 1970, never have we seen such a massive spike in people that were claiming unemployment in such a short space of time. And from unemployment rates of low single digits, the Reserve Bank Chair Jerome Powell said yesterday that unemployment in the US could reach 25%, which is, more or less in line with the Great Depression. So it's the ramifications of the COVID-19 pandemic are extremely dire. Of course, it does have different implications throughout the world. Some continents are affected worse than others. The US and the Euro area are supposed to be some of the worst affected continents in the world. So turning to the South African economy, this crisis couldn't have come at a worse time for the South African economy because we were already in crisis. We were already seeing consistently lower GDP numbers year after year. You can see, according to the graph, in 2011 was the last really good year we had in terms of the growth of the economy. You can see that ever since then, it's been very much downhill. So what the COVID-19 pandemic has done in South Africa is that it has really just accelerated the already downward trajectory that the economy was taking. So very similar to other countries, unemployment is expected to go up considerably. People are expected to get considerably poorer. And according to the government's National Treasury, approximately 1.7 million jobs are expected to be lost. So really massive job losses. And as I mentioned, South Africans are expected to get significantly poorer. And listen, we already lost a decade. Economists are talking about the lost decade. If we look at this graph, which is GDP per capita, which is basically income per person, you can see that before the big spike that we forecast in for 2020 is that we were more or less at 2007 levels in terms of per capita income. So over the last 10 years, effectively, nothing has really happened in the South African economy. People haven't gotten any wealthier whatsoever, and now it's just expected to get even worse going forward. We do have some initial data on the economic impact of the COVID-19 pandemic that's come out recently. The SACI Business Confidence Index is one. You can see that the Business Confidence Index reached its lowest point ever in this data series, coming in at 77.8 points, the previous low being 88.1 points, which was all the way back in April of 1985. And we're expecting this in a lot of the data, as well as the Purchasers Managers Index, which is a survey of business leaders. You can see the employment and business activity components of the index falling significantly. Business activity falling off the graph almost, which is the light blue line. You can see much lower than the trough of the 2008-2009 crisis 10, 12 years ago or so. Employment is also expected to fall quite significantly in the short run. So government has reacted with quite sizable stimulus measures of 500 billion rand, which is roughly 10% of our economy, which compares quite favorably, especially if we compare to other emerging markets, right? So you can see the graph on the right. This compares the economic support announced by G20 governments, so relatively richer countries, and you can see that we're more or less in the middle there at around 10%. The likes of Germany, Italy, all the way up above 30%. Really massive stimulus measures, and we do compare relatively favorably, especially to other emerging markets. So what is this going to be made up of? We're going to expand social grants to the vulnerable, about 50 billion rand, an extra child support grant, disability grants, a new grant for some people who don't receive grants, 40 billion rand for the unemployment insurance fund, 200 billion rand loan guarantees through the South African Reserve Bank, 100 billion rand to protect jobs and salaries, some money to municipalities, some money for protective equipment. So that's on the fiscal side, absolutely necessary. Unfortunately, going into this crisis, we don't have a lot of what economists call fiscal space, in that our government is effectively relatively broke over years of maladministration, corruption, etc., just not managing their balance sheet correctly. Is that there is really limited scope for any big fiscal expansion. We need more than double of the 500 billion rand to really play a proper counter-cyclical role in the economy. Unfortunately, we just do not have the balance sheet to do that. So on the monetary side, that's where we actually do have some ammo. The interest rates are still in a range where we can still lower them. So we've already seen a 200 basis point drop in the repo rate, and this is stimulus of between 80 and 100 billion rand, and we are expecting a further drop in the repo rate later this week, probably another 100 basis point drop. For the monetary authorities to get involved. And the Reserve Bank's also been buying government bonds on the secondary market to inject some liquidity into government. There is, of course, a lot of skepticism around the stimulus, right? Firstly, is it enough? Unfortunately not. It's not enough. We just don't have the money. And there are obviously big social implications for this. Implementation, right? Implementation is always a massive issue when it comes to the government implementing any sort of policies, really. The plans are always very good. They talk the talk, but they just unfortunately do not walk the walk in most instances. Implementation, we've already seen being a bit of an issue for example, around the social grants. Some people got paid double. Some people didn't get paid at all in one of the first rounds of the social grants. A lot of companies and construction companies as well are struggling to claim from UIF, for example. We've seen some corruption at the municipal level in terms of the food parcels. And these are just some of the examples in terms of implementing the stimulus, which I think is going to be a little bit of an issue going forward. I'll come back to, the president did mention a substantial infrastructure build program in the big announcement when he announced the stimulus, but we haven't heard a whole lot about that yet. I'll come back to that a little bit later. And of course, a bit of criticism about some of the really arbitrary lockdown rules, right? So we're all a little bit frustrated with them, and it's having an unnecessarily dire effect on the economy in a way. So we can absolutely applaud the government for instituting lockdowns so early. We were definitely a week or two ahead of many other countries. We really caught it early, and that was really well done. So we can applaud them on that, right? But we do have one of the strictest lockdowns in the world. So just a few of the examples, right? Until a few days ago, e-commerce wasn't allowed. One of the only countries where we didn't allow e-commerce. So for 48 days, we didn't have e-commerce. How many jobs did that cost in those 48 days, for example? How much money did the government waste by themselves on having to bail out some of those industries so largely with some of the stimulus measures that could have been used for something else, right? We're the only country in the world to ban cigarettes. Doesn't make much sense. We're one of 5 countries to ban the sale of alcohol. You know, we can debate it, but to me, it doesn't make that much sense. You know, it's some of these just really arbitrary winter clothing rules, for example, and we can, of course, criticize some of the heavy-handed approach by the army and the police as well. And there is growing pushback against some of these irrational lockdown rules, and we are starting to realize that this hard lockdown is definitely going to have a more negative effect than the actual COVID-19 virus. We don't know for sure yet the degree to this. There's no good research out there yet, but it is a debate that we're going to have going forward, and we can make some more data-driven decisions. So we do know, and we're waiting for more details, but we do know most of the country will go to level 3 at the end of May, except potentially areas where the outbreak is more severe, such as, which is basically your metropolitan areas, which are the biggest business hubs of the country. So it doesn't make a whole lot of sense thinking about it from a construction point of view as well. You know, is construction, whereas residential and commercial building is only going to be allowed under level 3 and 2, that means it's going to take a very long time, for example, in Cape Town, in Randburg, in, you know, these bigger municipalities for a lot of businesses to actually go back to work. And you can see South Africans are becoming increasingly more negative about lockdown. This is from Predictive Insights. They look at Twitter sentiment around the COVID-19 lockdown in South Africa, and you can see that it's trended more and more negative. People are becoming more and more fed up with the lockdown. Okay, so that was brief economic overview. Let's get to construction. So this is really what I want to chat about today. So the construction industry, different sectors are affected to a worse degree than others, right? So if you think about, you feel really bad for people that are in the hospitality industry, for example, tourism. I have a good friend who runs a tourism company. I mean, he's basically expecting to close his business for almost the rest of the year. The airline industries, for example, very badly affected. So we have some initial research from Arndt et al. 2020, and their research does show construction being one of the worst affected industries. They are expecting GDP at factor cost for construction to show a larger than 60% decline, which, as you can see, it's the worst category, unfortunately. You know, in line with accommodation, catering, manufacture of certain types of goods, and as well as the recreation and other community services. If you look at the risk of transmission, was this PPGI industry survey that Genesis Analytics released, you can see the construction sort of falls more or less in the middle. They score, in terms of the risk of transmission, of transmitting the virus, construction scores 9 out of 20. So it's not as severe as, you know, obviously the airline industries or hotels or restaurants or some of the more retail, various wholesale retail trade industries. So it fits more or less in the middle. And if we look at the different levels, so this is now from the Disaster Management Act regulations, alert level 4 during COVID-19 lockdown, which is released on the government's website. So this is basically what we have. It's a working document. It seems like what we have on, you know, which different sectors are going to go back when. And so just to go through them a bit, because this is paramount to understanding when we can expect a return to construction activity in the different sectors. So Level 5, we know only essential maintenance work on power and water projects was allowed. Basically, the industry was shut down. We estimate maybe 1 or 2% of the industry was working, or the capacity, right? Then we went to level 4 a couple of weeks ago, and in level 4, only construction projects that are funded by the public sector to some degree are allowed to go back. So this is a relatively big chunk of the industry. It's, road building, water and sanitation and sewage, power, your schools, your hospitals, anything that's really publicly funded. These contractors have started to go back to work, but as I'll show from our conversation with some contractors, that's been very, very slow return to work for a lot of these guys. They have to submit very lengthy health and safety strategies, and there doesn't seem to be any uniform way of doing this, right? So there does seem to be a lot of red tape with going back to work. Some have been more successful than others, but it's been very, very slow going back to work for a lot of these contractors. And the public side of the construction industry is a big chunk of the industry. It's roughly half of the construction sector in terms of value. So if we could be more effective at getting those contractors back to work and have them working at a higher capacity, this could go a long way at unlocking growth going forward, or limiting the damage, really. We've seen a lot of contractors only operate at about 30% capacity to a large degree. So that's level 4. Then level 3, so I mean, this is all subject to change, right? I think it is open to consultation still at each level, but this is what we have for now. So then at level 3, all of the above plus commercial building projects will be allowed to go back to work. So this is your non-residential sector, right? This is building of shopping centers, office blocks, those sort of things, right? Then only in level 2 will the construction of residential projects be allowed to go back. So I mean, that's just from this alone, we can say that the residential market is definitely going to be one of the worst affected parts of the construction industry. If they can only go back at level 2, I mean, that's very long. That's months from now. And again, if this isn't going to be allowed, if there are going to be different levels based on different municipalities, based on the spread of the virus, etc., then it's going to be a very, very long time for the big metropolitan areas to go to level 2, for example. And that is where the majority of residential building happens in any case. So very, very difficult situation. So let's look at some initial data, right? So that's a bit of the context. Let's look at some initial data. Let's look at some of the feedback from contractors on the ground. From our researcher, Renal Kortzer, she talks to contractors on a daily basis. We have a very good feel for what's going on. Okay, so some initial data from DataBuild and our data here at Industry Insights. We just got this data in yesterday in terms of the number of construction projects that go out to tender. And unsurprisingly, it's an all-time low figure since the inception of this data in January of 1998. Very, very, very few projects went out to tender in April, unsurprisingly, right? And this is the lowest figure ever reported. Quite staggering. You can see the line almost falling right off the graph. So almost no projects going out to tender. And also, if we look at the number of projects that have been postponed, also a bit of a spike there, a little bit lower than I would have expected, to be completely honest. You can see in the middle of the graph there was really massive amounts of projects got put on hold in the previous financial crisis in 2008, 2009, and we are expecting it to be more or less within that range going forward. So you can see that there was a bit of a spike now in April, and that is the highest number of projects that have been postponed since the financial crisis, or since the aftermath of the financial crisis. So I think it's just a precursor for what's to come. Okay, so very interesting. So we have chatted to quite a few contractors that have started to go back to work, that are working on, mostly road projects. So just for example, I want to give a bit of feedback, what they're saying, and draw a few conclusions. So this isn't all of the contractors we've spoken to, but I just want to give a few examples and then I'll draw some conclusions from that. So, for example, Stefanuti Stocks, they're working on a 400 million rand road project in Durban. They said that 30% of their staff had returned to the 3rd of May, and they weren't having any issues around social distancing. People were happy to be back at work. Silvers 2000, they're working on a 200 million rand road project. I mean, not road project, excuse me. They're working on a 200 million rand project at the Saldanha Bay IDZ. And there's a bit of an issue there because they're not quite sure which jurisdiction this falls into, whether it is a public project. And to a degree, it isn't, because the investors, the clients in this instance is the private sector to a large degree. So they're struggling to get the right permits because of this issue. And some other interesting comments that they've made is that they've said that they are planning on working through the builders' holiday in December, which some of the other contractors are also thinking about doing. And they also mentioned that they have innovative ways to actually be on site 24 hours a day to sort of speed up construction. So what we gathered is that a lot of contractors didn't go straight back to work when we went to level 4. Some of them have taken 2 or 3 weeks, and some of them still today aren't even back on site. They're still waiting for confirmation from the clients, which is some level of government in this case, to go back on site after they submit all these health and safety documents. So another one, Jordan Construction, they're working on a road project in Joburg. And a week ago, they still had to do several presentations to the clients around their strategy of safely reopening. And they were still waiting for confirmation 2 weeks after they had submitted all of these documents after we went to level 4 to reopen sites. And they're worried about their cash flow to a large degree. Another road contractor working on a project in the Western Cape, they've said that it's almost an impossible, this is verbatim, it is almost an impossible task to acquire the correct permits. So, and also they need to submit full criteria on where all the workers are coming from, where they're going to stay, what are their plans around social distancing, etc., etc., etc. All the PPE needs to be detailed and scrutinized by the client, which is SANRA in this instance. And they have various projects in different provinces, and because the borders are still closed, they're having issues, right? Arabics as well, they're still having to do several presentations to the client about their strategy of safely reopening. So what are some of the conclusions that we can draw? So those are just some examples. What are some of the conclusions we can draw from the contractors we've spoken to? Apologies for this. The animations, they don't work on this Webinar Jam platform, so they're supposed to come up after I've said all this, but I've got what I've said here. So to summarize, right? A lot of the contractors, what we've gathered from contractors is that there's no standard or set of rules, right? That each client's health and safety consultant basically has a different view on the preventative measures that are supposed to be taking place. There's no standard set of rules that they all have to adhere to. So that's wasting a lot of time now, because if you're a contractor, you're working in different provinces on different projects, etc. It makes it a bit difficult. Now you have to submit all these different plans and do different things on site. So that's a bit of an issue. In many cases as well, contractors are really struggling to obtain the necessary permits. I mean, this is linked to my first point. Some of the contractors, while they've said that sanitizing everything on site and adhering to the health and safety guidelines, whatever they may be on the day, is taking, it's costly and it's timely. It's taking, I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing these things. I'm just saying this is the reality of the situation, is that it's taking almost 2 hours of their day to sanitize everything and adhere to all of these health and safety standards. And some contractors have said it's costing them almost 20,000 Rand a month to buy all the protective gear and the the cleaning equipment that they have to sanitize everything with. So it's costly and it's wasting time to some degree. So this is going to have an impact as well. And then again, a lot of the contractors have complained about the slow process of submitting these health and safety plans. And some contractors, when we spoke to them, they weren't even on site yet. And what we're also seeing, which is very much expected, is that a lot of projects are starting to be postponed, as I showed in the graph previously, from talking to contractors. One example of this is the John Dube mega city development, which is a 35 billion Rand development, which was expected to go on for the next 10, 15 years or so. This is one of the big projects that we know about so far that has been put on hold. So as investors become more, it's a very uncertain environment, right? So until we have more certainty going forward, a lot of these projects are going to be put on hold because the investor, they could be under they could have financial problems themselves because of the virus. So a lot of this is unfortunately going to happen. And then the big conclusion from this is that currently we only expect that the capacity of the construction industry is we're operating at between 10 and 15% capacity, more or less. Because a lot of the contractors we've spoken to are only at around 30% capacity, and the public sector is, roughly 40-50% of the overall industry. So even though a sizable chunk of the industry can go back to work, this hasn't really happened, and we're still operating at a very, very low level. And this needs to speed up to a large degree if we want to see any sort of return to normality and limit the degree the scope of this virus, how it's going to affect the construction industry. Okay, so on the 22nd of April, we released our forecast reports, our forecast updates, looking at a few scenarios on how this COVID-19 pandemic is going to affect the construction industry specifically. So we took a very simple approach, right? These models can become very, very complicated. There are so many variables that we should be taking into account, but it's extremely difficult, right? So we went for a very simple approach. We're assuming that the pandemic peaks in September, which is according to communication from the Department of Health. Is that a fair assumption? I don't know. We're assuming no major resurgence of the virus late in the year. Also, is that a fair assumption? I don't know. There could be a resurgence late in the year. We don't know. There's a lot of uncertainty, right? So our forecasts are largely hinging on when different parts of the industry go back, and we're using that alert system that I've explained, and at what capacity, right? So we're using some of our data on the ground to take that into account. And then some of the drivers long-term that we think are going to have quite a pertinent effect on the industry is that we are taking into account quite a major slump in the spending by government going forward. And this is for various reasons, which I'll get into. But I mean, the downgrade by Moody's, for example, it is going to be a lot more expensive for the government to borrow money, which is one of the ways that they finance their spending. Also, tax revenue collection this year is going to be down considerably, more than 20%. We're expecting more than a 20% decrease in tax revenue collection this year. That's also going to put a major hole in the fiscus, as well as the fact that the government's spending an extra 500 billion rand on the stimulus measures. So that's again going to put a big hole in the fiscus. And what does this mean going forward for construction? Unfortunately, it means that there's, in theory, going to be less money to go around to spend on infrastructure, right? We are still waiting for details on the substantial infrastructure build program that is going to be a part of the stimulus, but there hasn't been anything so far. We're also then assuming a much weaker economy going forward, right? The average consumer, with all the job losses, with all the pay cuts, with all the salary freezes, etc., is that people are going to get considerably poorer, and this is going to have quite a significantly dire effect on the construction industry, because that means people are going to have the demand for housing, for shopping centers, for office blocks, etc. All of these things is going to fall quite significantly going forward. Okay, so we have three scenarios. We have our baseline, which is our most likely scenario, which we peg it around, the model pegs it around a 60% probability. Then we have a more positive scenario. So this light blue, so you can see the dark blue line is our previous forecast. That's what we were expecting. And you can see that we were seeing some sort of mild turnaround on the civil side of things, but building we were expecting to come under quite significant pressure going forward. And you can see that it was declining somewhat, and then really flatlining going forward over the next 4 to 5 years or so, in our opinion, from our previous forecast. So very much a sideways moving environment is what we are coming off, right? So it's important to contextualize that. Then you can see that we are expecting quite a significant decline in 2020 because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is the baseline scenario number one, which is our most likely scenario. And the main assumptions there are that we're expecting the construction industry to be at roughly 50% capacity from the 14th of May to the end of June. So for the next month and a half or so, 70% capacity thereafter until the end of October, and 100% capacity from October onwards. And of course, we're going to have to adjust this in coming months because there's a lot of uncertainties, a lot of moving parts, a lot of variables changing in a very short space of time. But this is what our baseline scenario shows. And what it shows is that we're expecting the construction industry to contract by roughly 28% in 2020 in our baseline scenario. So obviously, that's a significant decline. And also the variable we're forecasting here is the gross fixed capital formation in construction. So it's your construction works and residential and building. So we're expecting quite a big slump in construction activity, in the investment in the construction industry. Then a more positive scenario. So, I mean, we could see maybe these big stimulus measures by governments that they have sort of spoken about but given us no details about. Maybe the economy bounces back quicker than we expect. Maybe a vaccine comes sooner than we expect, for example. So there are some more positive scenarios. So then the positive scenario, which the model pegs at around 30% probability, is that the construction industry only contracts by about 14.5%. But this is looking a bit optimistic because this does assume 70% capacity from the beginning of May until the middle of June. We don't think that's going to happen, do we? And then 80% capacity thereafter until the end of September, and then capacity from the end of September onwards. So it's looking a little bit optimistic, which is why the model pegs the probability so low. And then the more negative scenario, which the model pegs at about 55% probability, is that we are at 50% capacity until the end of September. So that actually seems a little bit more likely, to be honest. I mean, we did this report came out almost a month ago now. A lot has changed since then. So this is seeming a bit more likely that we are going to be at about 50% capacity until the end of September, at least. I mean, where are we now? Middle of May. And then at about 70% capacity thereafter until the end of the year, and only about 100% capacity thereafter. That might be a little bit more negative. But anyways, in this scenario, we are expecting the industry to contract by about 34.3%, so much more significant. And you can see it also has a more negative longer run trajectory. So those are our main scenarios. This is a summary of the baseline forecast, and you can see there is quite a big disparity between civil and building. So I mean, it's still bad, right? It's just different degrees of how bad it is. So you can see in our baseline scenario, we're expecting building investments in the building industry to contract by about 28%. So this is from about 101 billion to 72 billion. Civil construction, not as bad, still not good. I mean, it's still almost a 20% contraction in civil construction. And this brings me into what I want to chat about next, which is civil versus building, right? There are very much different dynamics. As I mentioned, civil construction, it's very much privately driven. Not privately driven. It's very much driven by the public sector. So you're spending on roads, water and sanitation, power projects, etc. The private sector has started to play more of a role in the civil sector mainly because of renewable energy and because of the degree to which government has really had to consolidate their budgets and spend less money on infrastructure over the last few years. But going forward, we are a little bit more optimistic about the civil industry. If the civil industry can get back to work at a greater pace, then this could go a long way at limiting the damage, really, because the money is kind of still there, right, for the civil sector in terms of infrastructure spending. And the government, to a degree, can play a counter-cyclical role in bailing out the economy to some degree by investing in infrastructure. And that's going to go all into roads, into water, into power. So a little bit more positive for the civil sector. And just to contextualize it, we were expecting a bit of a mild recovery on the civil front. You can see this is some of our estimated tender values data. Roads and water, so you can see in the second, third, and fourth quarters of last year, we're seeing much better data for the big projects coming out to tender in roads and water specifically. You're seeing double-digit year-on-year growth in the estimated tender value. So we were seeing, it's a pity because we were seeing a mild, I wouldn't say turnaround, but we were seeing a bit of a mild recovery in the civil sector. Contractors were a lot more positive around tender activity. You can see on the far right, that's 89.3%, and it's improved. This is from the states of the SAFSEC States of the Industry Survey, and you can see that sentiment around tender activity was improving quite significantly over the last 4 or 5 quarters. From in 2018 Q3, 0% of contractors in the survey said that tender activity was satisfactory, and you can see that was trending upwards quite significantly going forward. And you can see that also according to the confidence indices. So this is now looking back a bit. I'm just sort of trying to contextualize the base that we're coming off going forward. You can see that the BER's civil confidence index has also ticked up to some degree. You can see the dark blue line, the last few points. I mean, it's coming off all-time lows, but the last few points were a bit more positive. Whereas on the other hand, we were expecting a much more negative environment for the building industry going forward. As South Africans were getting poorer, as the economy was really, really stuttering, this was expected to have quite a negative effect on the building industry going forward. So we're seeing this building and civil swap to some degree. And also the SAFSEC confidence index was also a lot more positive in the first quarter of this year. You can see a little uptick there. So maybe a bit more positive is that, okay, so we did see another cut to the infrastructure budget at the beginning of this year from 860 odd billion to 815 billion, but this money is still there, right? If the industry can get back on site and back to work, this money will play a counter-cyclical role. We don't really think that it's good that this money is going anywhere in the short term, right? We think there are going to be more issues in the longer run around the state of the fiscus, and that's going to have a negative impact for the civil industry going forward. But this money is kind of still there. So this does mean that the government can play a sort of counter-cyclical role by investing in infrastructure. We do know that 130 billion of the 500 billion is going to be reprioritized from the budget somewhere, but we don't really know where from. I don't think it's going to be from the infrastructure budget, in my opinion. So when contractors get on site, we think that there will be work in the civil sector going forward. And I draw your attention to some of the figures from the budget. You can see that in nominal terms, at least, water and transport were expected to grow by 10% and 8% respectively in terms of the amount of money the government was spending in those segments on infrastructure. So this could still be there when the industry goes back. And then also a major point, right? In Cyril Ramaphosa's initial speech on the 500 billion rand stimulus measures the whole stimulus plan that they were implementing, right in the beginning of the speech, you can see this is right in the beginning of the speech where he starts to announce that they're going along with this 500 billion rand infrastructure. It says, central to the economic recovery strategy will be the measures we will embark on to stimulate demand and supply through interventions such as substantial infrastructure build program, the speedy implementation, blah, 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 blah. It's literally the first thing that the president mentioned was a substantial infrastructure build program. And then they said that they'll outline it in coming days. Of course, they didn't do that. So that's maybe positive going forward. It's the first thing that was mentioned. So, but again, we've really heard nothing about this further. This is the only mention of it. So it'd be nice to hear a little bit more of that. And we're seeing that there is going to be an emergency budget that is going to be tabled towards the end of June. So we're hoping that there'll be more details there on this so-called substantial infrastructure build program. But as I mentioned, government is very good at talking about all the things they're going to do. They're not that good at implementing them, unfortunately. If we compare to the infrastructure fund, right, which is supposed to be a big stimulus measure, there's not a whole lot of information on the fund. It's very difficult to find out what projects are going through this fund, how much money is being spent on the fund, etc., etc., etc. It's not a very transparent process, which is a little bit of an issue. And then obviously most positive is that the civil sector is luckier in a way in that they are the first that is allowed to go back to work. You can see it's under level 4. The whole country is currently at level 4. So the civil sector will slowly start going back to work. So if you're a contractor or a manufacturer that is involved specifically in civil-related infrastructure, then that's good for your business, right? It's a bit lucky in a degree in that the impact of the lockdown and this different alert system is supposed to be the best for the civil sector going forward if we can get everyone on site. Whereas it's going to be a lot worse for the building industry. And then, as I've mentioned, a big caveat to a few of the more positive things that I've gone through now is that there is going to be really, really massive pressure on the fiscus in the medium to longer run for reasons I've mentioned. The rating downgrade, it's a lot more expensive for government to borrow money now. We have to pay back all the stimulus loans at some point, right? Even though it's only 1% interest that are charged on some of the loans, we do have to pay them back later down the line. There's going to be a massive slump in tax revenue this year. We've already seen what SARS has said. And you can see we've expected, IHS market are expecting the budget deficit to breach 16.5% as a percentage of GDP. I mean, this is from 6%. So it's almost tripled in terms of the fiscal deficit. And unfortunately, this does mean in the longer run that there is going to be less money to be spent for infrastructure, which will negatively affect the civil industry. All right, so that is civils. Let's chat a bit about building. Building it's definitely, it's private sector driven, right? And the private sector is coming under huge pressure. So we are expecting the building industry to be much harder hit than civils. And so at the end of the day, it's a huge demand shock to the average South African consumer, who is going to get poorer over the next months and couple of years for sure. So whereas the government can sort of play this counter-cyclical role within the construction industry, that's only really for the civil sector. I mean, they can invest in schools and hospitals to some degree, but that's a very small part of the building industry. So the private sector isn't really geared to play this sort of counter-cyclical role or in these more depressed times. So as I showed in our baseline forecast, we are expecting 28.2% contraction in investments in the building sector. So let's chat about the residential industry first. So as I mentioned, it's from the information we have is that the residential, the contractors who build, residential housing, anything in the residential sector, they are going to be the last to go back from what we know so far. This could change, as I mentioned. So they are the last to go back. And you can see this is from Arndt et al.'s initial study on the effect of lockdown and the COVID-19 pandemic on the South African economy. And you can see that South Africans are going to get considerably poorer. You can see that households in the top half of the income distribution, their model, at least, their multiplier model, expects a 25% drop in their incomes. So what does that mean for residential housing? That means that there's going to be a big drop in demand for different types of residential housing, right? Which means that's going to filter through to construction. There's going to be less houses to be built going forward. So it's going to have quite a serious impact on the residential markets. And it's important to mention that the building industry, in our opinion, was already entering a recession. So we just got data for February now. It's going to be very interesting to see the data for April and May, looking at the effect of the lockdown on building plans approved and completed, etc. It's going to probably fall off the graph again. But in February, we already saw, looking at the last 12 months until February this year, in terms of the square meters that were reportedly approved through municipalities, until the end of February for the last years, we saw the lowest number of square meters approved since, when was it? I think it was since the early 90s, if I can. Yeah, I've got it here. So it was since the early 90s. Since the early 90s, we haven't seen so few square meters approved through municipalities on a 12-month period. So you can see that the building industry was already entering into some sort of recession. There were 13.46 million square meters approved until the end of February 2020, compared to the previous low, which was 13.49 million, which were approved, which was the worst point after the financial crisis in 2008, 2009. And you can see, reading a lot of, John Luce, for example, who's expert in property, he says that the residential market will take in excess of 3.5 years to recover. So we're going to see rental deflation of this year and next year of 3 and 4%. So that is what the property experts are expecting. And that is in nominal terms. So house prices are expected to drop significantly, and this is testament to really substantial lack of demand. This is as many tenants get retrenched, they get salary cuts, etc. They just aren't able to pay their rent. It's as simple as that. And this is going to have a really negative effect on the residential building industry going forward. And you can see, if we look at, anecdotally, if we look at the property funds, the share prices of the property funds and the market capitalizations, they have been one of the worst performers on the JSE since the outbreak of the COVID-19 virus over the last few months. You can see that their market caps have fallen significantly going forward, looking back over the last 3 months. If you want to understand the residential and the non-residential, if you want to understand the non-residential market going forward, Growthpoint released a very nice update on their business yesterday evening, saying how, which I'll get into now, is that a lot of the retailers are really struggling to pay their rent in malls, for example, tourism. The V&A waterfront is one of their big properties that they lease out, and that relies very much on tourism. They said 50% of retail sales at the V&A waterfront are solely from tourists, for example. So that has literally disappeared and isn't expected to return until the end of the year, really. So if you look at these different segments, it all filters through, it all interconnects, and you can see that, rightly so, that the market is very negative about the property funds going forward. So turning more to the non-residential sector, they are expected to go back now during level 3. So, I mean, that's expected to be relatively soon. But as I mentioned, metropolitan areas potentially will not go to level 3. They're going to remain at level 4. And unfortunately, this is where the majority of commercial and residential projects happen. They happen in the hubs, the business hubs of our economy, right? So if a lot of the metropolitan areas stay at level 4, it's going to mean very, very few contractors are actually going to go back to work, because, you know, not a lot of them are working outside of these bigger metropolitan areas. So we're going to have to wait and see. Then also, just to briefly touch on some of the segments, there are going to be a lot of long-term implications of this COVID-19 pandemic, right? So if we look at office space, for example, look what we're doing now. I'm giving a presentation over this Webinar Jams app. We're all on Zoom. We're doing Skype. We're doing Microsoft Teams, etc. It's a lot more efficient. So I think a lot of businesses have realized that it's not really that necessary to go into the office. So this has given us, this COVID-19 pandemic has given us, it's forced a lot of businesses to experiment with the idea of everyone working, or not everyone, a lot of the staff working remotely. And what are the implications on office space going forward? What are the implications of social? We're going to have to social distance when we go back to the office in any case. You know, so it's going to have implications going forward. And in our opinion, this is going to speed up a trend of, you know, it was already moving in that direction, is that more and more people were working remotely, or at least, you know, companies were starting to allow their staff to work at home maybe twice a week, for example. And we think this is going to speed up. So in terms of the demand for office space, this is really going to change the dynamic going forward. Then if you look at the retail industry, no, it's not retail, this is industrial. So if you look at the industrial and warehousing sector, according to some of the property experts, the industrial sector of the construction industry is expected to be one of the worst affected. This is because the manufacturing industry has very close links to, you know, it's a very good proxy for growth in the overall economy. If you look at the manufacturing industry's output over the last 20 years or so, it will almost mirror that of GDP growth. So the fact that the economy is expected to plunge by, you know, in excess of 7%, which is looking a lot more optimistic now, this does mean that the industrial sector is going to be one of the worst affected sides of the non-residential industries going forward. And of course, just to finish off, shopping centers, right? If you look at the demand for shopping centers going forward, it's very much linked to what the average South African has, the money they have in their back pocket, right? So for example, we've seen Edcon go into business rescue. They have over 730 stores and almost 1 million square meters of real estate countrywide. So what does this mean for malls going forward and the retail segments? Hospitality industry is also one. There are restaurants in malls, for example. And overall, with weak economic fundamentals, the demand for the goods and services that we buy from the malls is going to fall significantly. A lot of people are going to be more reluctant to go to malls, even as we are allowed to. We're going to shop online more. And of course, we've seen during this pandemic that many tenants within the malls are unable to pay their rent and are asking for leniency from landlords, for example. So this is going to significantly impact the demand for all the construction of shopping centers going forward. And again, I refer you to Growth Point's Sense release that they released yesterday, because Edcon is there. They are Edcon's landlord, and you know, they have a few comments about the retail industry going forward. All right, that's mostly my story. Thank you very, very much for listening. Hope it gave some clarity on, you know, what our expectations are for the rest of the year. Listen, it's not going to be easy. We just have to try our best to weather the storm to a large degree, be innovative in these times if we can, manage your business accordingly. Yeah, great. Thank you very, very much. I look forward to your questions. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, David, for the very insightful presentation and for giving us a lot of valued information about the state of the construction industry as well as the civil industry. We have received a couple of questions. We're going to go through some of them now. I can just get onto the chat screen. So the first question is from Fernando Cardozo. And he says there is a real ambiguity around residential development. Can we assume that multi-unit developments can proceed in level 3 and that level 2 regulation refers to single private dwellings? Can you provide some clarity on that, please?
Thanks for the question. Unfortunately, I can't really provide much clarity because the only document I have is that one I referenced that was released on the 29th of April, and there isn't a whole lot of detail there. And we have phoned around a bit to various government departments, and there isn't a whole lot of detail. I don't think people know exactly, I don't think they even know themselves which parts of the residential market are going to be allowed to go back yet. And I think a lot of this is still very much up in the air. I think as we go from level 4 to level 3 to level 2, I think there's going to be a lot of consultation between different parts of the industry about each level going back there. So I think we only really have a very rough plan from government at the moment. I don't think we can really draw a whole lot of insight yet going forward. Unfortunately, I wish there was a bit more detail. So are you still on mute, Richard? Sorry, I'm not able to hear you.
I'm saying, sorry, there's not much there's not a lot of funny stuff to talk about when it comes to COVID-19 because it has such a dreadful impact on so many lives around the world. But earlier on, when we had some connectivity problems, I thought COVID-19 was attacking this webinar series as well. The next question is from Peter Buerta, and Peter says some commentators have ventured that an outcome of COVID-19 is a less globalized economy. COSATU has requested government to incentivize beneficiation of natural resources. Will this assist in the construction industry, and can we expect government to heed these calls? Are you there, David?
Yeah. Sorry, I didn't catch the first part. Sorry about that.
He says some commentators have ventured that the outcome of COVID-19 is a less globalized economy. And he's saying COSATU have requested government to incentivize beneficiation of our natural resources. Will this assist the construction industry, and can we expect government to heed these calls? I think the whole question around beneficiation and making sure that we industrialize our economy has been one that people have been having for many years now. Does this present us with an opportunity to speed up that process now, especially in the developing economies like South Africa, where we send all our raw materials overseas and then we buy the expensive stuff back?
Sure. So that is, I could probably give another presentation on that question. But what I will say is that, in my opinion, there is a bit of, maybe you can call it a myth around what the opportunities are from the COVID-19 pandemic from a political point of view, right? So I've seen some commentators saying that this gives us an opportunity to have sort of a complete reset, right? A lot of these more radical policies, such as expropriation without compensation, the NHI, nationalizing Reserve Bank, a lot of them have taken a backseat, which is more positive, right? But I would point people to the fact that Cyril Ramaphosa does not have broad support from within the ANC for the majority of his, what we want to call, market-friendly reform policies. So going forward, I think we've been a little bit optimistic to think that we can have some sort of full reset in terms of getting the president to implement his agenda going forward. I could talk for a lot longer, but I think I'll leave it there. Probably didn't answer the question really, but.
Next question is from Nevashni Govender, and it says, if we have determined with confidence through your graphs that the construction sector is considered a medium risk and not a high risk sector as proposed by government, is this being communicated to government to allow construction to come back earlier than level 2? Maybe before I give you a chance to respond, just to indicate to those who are on the platform that through the Concrete Institute and many other industry bodies like SAFSEC, Master Builders Association, they've all been engaging government to try and speed up getting the construction industry to get back to work because of the high impact it has on jobs and potential job losses. And I think if one just looks around the world, even in places like the USA, Spain, Italy, and all these places where they've moved very quickly to open the construction industry because they realize the impact on infrastructure development and the economy overall. I think in Africa, just to give everyone a sense that as the industry, we've certainly engaged with government. As late as last week, the entire cement industry have engaged with the Department of Trade and Industry also to put forward our statistics during lockdown, how much product has been produced, how many people have been affected, how much product has been sold into the industry, because it doesn't help to have the cement industry open, but there's no demand for the product. So we have been communicating with government, but maybe you would like to expand on that?
Sure. So, yeah, I agree. If you look at other countries around the world, their construction industries it was one of the first sectors to go back. So under our level 5, construction would have been allowed to operate in a lot of other countries, a lot of Europe, many states in America, for example. And you're right. If we look at, so yes, the government do know that it's 9 out of 20 level risk. They're the ones who paid for that study. They know very well. So I think it brings us back to a lot of these arbitrary lockdown rules to a large degree that haven't been that well thought out, I don't think. I think it brings us back to that sort of line of criticism, if that's fair. So yes, I think if it's
Okay, David, it looks like we're losing you there a little bit.
We should be going back a little bit sooner. It does seem to be safe that that lend us. Sorry.
Okay, sorry, we didn't catch much of that. We do know that you're broadcasting out of Cape Town, and Cape Town is considered the epicenter of the virus in South Africa at the moment. Only joking. Maybe let's take the next question. We've lost David. The next question is from David. Will try and dial back in. I see he's trying to dial back in. The next question is from Gustav Nell. He says, the only question I have is relating to the sudden jump in 2021 and then another decline between 2022 and 2024. Where are these continuously decreasing figures? I understand that there is less money floating around, and why does it spiral down after a better 2022? So he's basically talking about the forecast, and he's saying, looks like there's a bit of an uptick next year, and then things go back down again, and he just wants some clarity on that. And says, where is all the to understand there's less money floating around, and where does this spiral downward after 2022? If you can provide some clarity on that.
Sure. So, I mean, we're obviously expecting a big downward spike this year, and that is mainly because we're not working, right? We're not on site. So, output is naturally going to decline in the construction industry. Then next year, 2021, it's a year-on-year calculation, right? So then next year it's coming off a very, very low base. So if we just assume that we're going to be fully operating next year, that's where we see a little bit of an uptick. Then the longer-term trend, in the more positive scenario, it's not all downhill, right? It does pick up to some degree, but in our most likely scenario, we do see the construction industry contracting further. One, because the building industry, we were already expecting to contract over the next 3 to 4 years. We're expecting the economy to get worse and worse, basically, and people to get poorer, and for the building industry to be more and more negatively affected. This has just accelerated it, made it even worse, right? So that's on the building side. Then on the civil side, also, before the COVID-19 pandemic, we were expecting basically a flat line in civil construction activity. because of the state of the fiscus and all of the issues that we're going to have going forward that have just been moved to now from 2 or 3 years' time, right? So from expecting flatline, now we're expecting moderately negative. It's actually not, it's not really that big of a change in the longer term trend, right? Overall, our government is going to be majorly indebted. They're going to pay a lot to borrow money, right, from international institutions going forward. This year and next year, we're going to collect a lot less tax revenue, a lot less, a substantial amount less that they use to fund infrastructure, for example. So there's an array of factors that explain the negative longer-term trend on civils and on building, with the economy expected to be so poor going forward. Even if a best case scenario, we expect GDP of 1% in 2022, let's say, the South African population is still 1.5% about. So in real terms, we're still going to be going backwards, and we were already forecasting that for years to come. Our previous forecast on GDP growth before the COVID-19 pandemic was that we weren't going to exceed 1.6% GDP growth until 2022 in any case. So in real terms, we were still expecting people to get poorer. This has just made it a bit worse in the short run.
Thanks. Then we have a question from Sahile Landi, and I'm not sure if it's a gentleman or a lady, but the question is, where does the Department of Human Settlements RDP units construction fall in? Is it in level 4 or in level 2? Look, it's definitely not level 4, we know that. It's either level 3 or level 2.
You see, there's also not a lot of clarity, because I mean, that is a public project, technically. So why doesn't that fall into level 4? I don't know. So I mean, I don't know then. It's residential, I guess. So is it level 2 then? See, there's not a whole lot of clarity on these things. It should be level 4 because it's a public project. The client is the government, is the Department of Human Settlements. But level 3, it's not a commercial project, is it? You know, so it's a residential project. So technically, according to what they've given us, probably level 2, I guess.
Okay, thanks. Next question from Famida Campbell, finance lady. She says, thanks for the presentation. It was very insightful. Any tips on what innovation can we expect in terms of office rental space? Now, this is something that the likes of Growth Point and these people will not like to hear. You know, the fact that people are thinking about continuing social distancing, maybe cutting down on office rental space, and that will obviously have an impact on companies like Growth Point and the like, who are big in the property rental space.
Sure. So there are a few things, right? Obviously, a lot more people are going to be working from home going forward. I think people are overestimating it a bit. People are saying, oh, everyone's going to be working from home. It's not going to be like that. There's going to be a bit of an uptick, right, in people working remotely. So this obviously means less demand for office space on that hand, on that side of the coin, right? But then also, if people go back to offices, the social distancing is going to have to continue within the office space. So then that sort of means we're going to need a bigger office for less people, right, to a degree. So in the short term, maybe that will balance that out to some degree. And I think a longer term trend is that we're also going to see, obviously, a lot of the offices now are very much centralized in metropolitan areas. They're in all of your bigger cities, right? So what we could see going forward is that there could be office spaces in more remote areas, for example. So people don't have to live in the city, pay exorbitant rent, etc., or buy an expensive house closer to where the office is, for example. Many implications going forward. I think overall, it's going to be more negative for the construction of commercial buildings in general. But I do think that there could be some more innovative things. We could have more. I forget what you call them. It's like these roaming offices. We can rent a desk, in a mobile office block somewhere. That could be that sort of thing going forward. So there could be more innovative things that counterbalance maybe some of the negative demand going forward potentially.
Thanks. And then we have another question from Fernando Cardozo, and he says it's certainly a very grim outlook, especially for the private sector. But the opportunity seems to be right now to establish some trust between business and government to implement the infrastructure spend, especially in the provision of medical and school facilities? What are your views? I certainly think a very good question. I think we all know that South Africa is lagging significantly when it comes to, even though we have, I think on a per capita basis, the highest spend on the education side. We spend quite a lot of money, and we're not seeing the results that we would like to see. And then on the medical front, there was this whole project on the National Health Scheme that was being spoken about. Maybe just some comments on those two.
Sure. So this is not new, right? We've been talking about this for the last year or two, about how many times have we heard the president say that we need a new social compact between business and labor, et cetera, et cetera. We absolutely do. Private sector's very much lost trust in the government to a large degree, and we do need a new social compact between business and the government to implement all of these plans going forward. I think some of the main problem there is that, again, business, the private sector to a large degree does not want to work with the public sector. It's just too difficult, right? And on the other hand, I think that, again, is not broad support within the ANC for implementing a lot of these ideas, from national government. So I think that plays a big role as well going forward. I mean, there's a lot of growth to be unlocked, as you call it, by getting the private sector and government working better together. How many times have we heard the word public-private partnership in a budget speech, for example, over the last 5 years or so? We've been trying for the last 5 years, even longer. It just hasn't worked. Business is not, they've tried, they're not interested in working with government to a large degree, unfortunately. So what government has to do is create a more favorable environment for the economy to operate in. But is that going to happen going forward? I'm not so sure. This is an opportunity for reform, right? I don't buy the fact that that will happen, unfortunately. It's just my personal opinion. Hopefully I'm wrong.
Okay, then we've got the last 2 or 3 comments quickly. I'll just go through them quickly. The one is from Nick Fee. He says, is there any channel for individual projects, for employers to apply their projects, sites opened outside of the alert level process? I suppose he's talking more about public-private partnerships here and opportunities for private investors to maybe influence government's decision-making around opening outside the alert level process. How flexible is the situation? Can it be negotiated?
I'm sorry, you cut out the last bit. I don't think it's very flexible, to be completely honest. I think there's so many sectors that are busy engaging with government, and everyone is lobbying for their own, personal business. At the moment, I really don't. I mean, it's one of the strictest lockdowns in the world, right? So I think the word flexibility doesn't come a whole lot into the equation to a large degree.
Thanks. And then we've got a comment from Henry Cockcroft from the CMA, the Concrete Product Manufacturers Association. And he says in excess of 28 industry associations represented the construction COVID-19 rapid response task team, doing work on moving construction to higher levels of risk-adjusted strategy published in April. Yes, thanks for clarifying that, Henry. There have been quite a number of industry players that have been involved in trying to convince government to move the industry into a higher alert level to get them going a lot faster. Yeah. And then the last one is from a colleague of mine, Mervyn Govender. He says some projects have resumed work on level 4 lockdown. However, they are still experiencing challenges of business forums and communities affecting progress of these projects. Have you got any idea of the impact of the revenue it's costing the industry, and is government doing enough to protect this?
So that's actually something important that I probably didn't actually mention. And it's going to get worse and worse, right? People are losing their jobs. People are unemployed. People are really desperate. So these business forums and all of these guys, violence on site is just going to keep getting worse and worse, unfortunately, in my opinion. In terms of estimating the impact, I think SAFSEC did a bit of a report on that towards the end of last year. It was billions. It was 60 billion, 80 billion, something like that. It is having a really, really negative effect. Almost ask any contractor, they've been affected to some degree in every province, really. It's spread throughout the country now, where it was first localized in just, KZN and parts of Joburg, but it's really spread throughout the country. It's becoming a massive, massive issue as people are getting more employed, losing employment, that sort of thing. I forgot the last part of the question. Sorry. I think I answered it. You're still on mute, Richard.
I think you've covered it. Thanks, David. I think that's where we're going to wrap up for today. Once again, just to thank you for availing your time, and just to let everyone know that we will make the presentation available both on the AfriSam website as well as the Industry Insight website. We'll also be sending the presentation to all of you who have dialed in, and thank you for dialing in. Our next webinar is on Tuesday, the 9th of June. We'll be shifting focus slightly, but still pretty much related to COVID-19 and its impact. And there we're going to be talking to a lady by the name of Karen Daubel, and she's going to be focusing on leadership development, responding to the coherence in the current crisis and any future challenges around leadership. So the focus there is going to be more around leading in a crisis like this, the kind of support that leaders would need to provide. So we've been focusing now on the economic health, we've been focusing on physical health, but we're now shifting towards mental and emotional health. So please dial in for our next webinar on Tuesday, the 9th of June. And I want to thank the two speakers that we've had on the platform so far for availing themselves. We've got more speakers that are coming on board and offering their time to assist in making a contribution to our country and our public at large. And I want to thank Karen for making herself available. We are engaging with a few other speakers, but also please feel free as you do engage with us. If there are any other topics you would like us to cover, you are more than welcome to send your request. We are merely just hosting all of these speakers and trying to make sure we make a contribution to our country. Thank you once again all for dialing in, and stay safe, stay home, and practice all the right things that we've been advised by the Department of Health in terms of social distancing, sanitizing, and all the things that we need to do to prevent the spread of the virus. All of the very best, and goodbye.
Thank you. Cheers. Goodbye.
Thank you.